So let me put out the first question for our keynotes and our panelists to interject as well. So this comes from George, and George says, ChatGPT has made up spurious claims about living people, including faculty, as reported this week by the Washington Post and USA Today. Turnitin turned on its AI detector this week, mid-semester, and a colleague I work with has already easily circumvented it. Why should any campus community agree to use these tools as they now exist?
I think my answer is that I don't really see how they can ban it. I understand the desire and the impetus and why some school districts absolutely said they will not use these tools, but I think it will be hard to enforce that. So even if you do decide to put a temporary ban on the use of such tools in your classroom, you still have to try to identify misuses. And so I'm not saying that people should be embracing these tools. I'm saying these tools are already all around us, so we have to interact with them. And the question is how.
One of the questions this certainly leads to is how can we address the issue of integrity, veracity, truthfulness? It seems there ought to be a way to make sure that these call them whatever you will, hallucinations, misstatements, there ought to be
errors.
A way.
Let's not call it
These
anything,
errors,
but what they are errors. The hallucination is just a fancy name given to make it appear not bad. One thing that's really interesting to me, testified in front of the USAI Commission. I've sat down with a bunch of regulators who are trying to regulate this and heard different sides because there's a lot of lobbyists out there as well, just being practical. And I think, and they can confuse issues with these terminologies like, oh, that's not so bad, or just do it, or dilute your laws and regulations as well. And there's a lot of lip service. Like no one in any place says our innovation is not broken. No one says I want irresponsible, malicious, innovation. Everyone says the same thing. It just means different things to different people. Ethics, the reason I kind of am careful with that word is it's everywhere, right? Every decision that you make, ultimately it's our choice. We know what something doesn't feel right or is wrong. Like if a student is using an AI tool to write an essay, like they know that that's not something they should be doing. It's going to keep them from learning. But we also know that when we're a student and we're overworked, we take shortcuts. So how you manage that today, for example, maybe prior to this tool, if I had money, I could pay another human being to write the essay for me. And I don't want to complicate further issues, but I think it's really interesting for us to look at. You will never have a guarantee that everyone's telling the truth and doing the right thing. But sometimes a university is saying, like, we don't tolerate that. We're going to call a ban on it for now until we realize how to do this, or whatever the term is. We're going to call a moratorium on it. Gives everybody a sort of a nod of what's right or wrong. So at least the people who want to do the right thing, higher percentage will do it and at least realize that they shouldn't do it. And they have to go through the barrier of getting over that sense of morality or ethics in order to cheat, right? So I'm not telling universities what to do. You all know that better than me, but I'm just saying that there are ways to manage things and, with human nature. And we know that because we do it in other areas all the time. So just because we're facing something with ChatGPT or AI, we don't have to throw all our understanding and knowledge of humans, how people work, what they respond to, how they can be sort of course corrected away. And maybe if you don't have that relationship with students, there's a deeper problem than the use of AI. Maybe you've lost something else. Maybe universities have become too much like corporations. I'm just hypothetically saying. What I'm saying is that there are deeper issues that you can kind of explore. I ask people in media, they say, oh, this social media, all this fake news that's generated. Is it always generated by AI? What about all the people who bought media and they take PR and just put it out in order to control the message? Where is this playbook and this algorithm is really coming from? That confuses it. I find it very interesting to examine, and it gives us different choices in making leadership decisions about how do you direct people to make better choices for themselves and become better citizens later because your students will eventually run companies. These companies that are around right now, they're going to be making the decisions about how they work and these technologies work. They'll be the future researchers. They'll be the scientists. What are you teaching them so that they make better choices?
And one of the things that I think we're confronting is what Alka was talking about earlier when she said we've been teaching people to act like algorithms and like machines. If you were inviting from your students the kind of essays that could be written by ChatGPT, then maybe you redefine what you ask them to write like, or, you ask them to explain something to you verbally, or, there are things that we can do. But at the same time, I don't want to minimize the kind of work that puts onto overworked professors and instructors to kind of figure this out on the fly mid-semester, which I think, again, is a failure of the folks who put this out into the world. It is a big demand to put on everybody.
Let me go to our next question we have up here, because we've got a lot of them. Aren't authoritarian governments already systematically manipulating their populations and us through AI manipulated databases, biased algorithms? Is there an inevitable Greshams Law of AI? How can good generative AI design overcome all of this?
Good generative AI is not going to overcome political power, the structure of, international law and what states do within their own borders. There's no chance. And so I think what we're trying to do is make sure that AI is designed and built and deployed ethically in countries that want that kind of AI. And there will definitely be other countries in which it is misused to, and it's already the case, to, to keep the population from having exactly the kind of human flourishing that we were talking about. So the answer is yes, it is happening. And the solution is not within generative AI, but within political systems and activism and, the kind of things that we've always had and tried to do.
I know it has my name on it. Somebody posted. I think, one thing, for example, we could do, I agree with what Irina said, we can't displace our maliciousness or decision-making or even harm to AI because it doesn't care. The thing that we can use these tools to do, just like we do in cybersecurity or privacy, is that it allows you to detect. So for example, you could make it a good practice, best practices to say, okay, AI has generated this content. And then you could also use it to detect other AI content because it's using some data. Maybe it's even trained using its own LLM models and it can detect it. But it really is going to get so complex that you're sometimes are going to need those tools to help kind of detect certain tools and manage or respond quickly to certain tools. So yes, you can use these tools to design detection. You can use good practices in designing these so that it becomes the general best practice. So again, greater effort for you to misuse them, and so that you can narrow the malicious use, the cases for malicious use further and further, and then you can tackle those like we do today when people use any technology or non-technology for malicious use. So, malicious use, authoritarian governments or people who want a lot of power, they're not going to go away. We have to have a multi-layered tool. And now what happens is they can now use these tools to reach a large group of people very fast. And so then you need a counter tool to manage that. And that's to Sam's earlier question about you want to be careful what you put in an open forum and transparency too quickly without building some protection and caveat and some sort of built-in safety mechanisms into these tools.
Thank you. This question comes from Lori. If enough faculty choose not to use these technologies because of their concerns, it seems that universities would hesitate to allocate funds to the resource. Why rush to deploy untried technologies using students and faculty as test rats?
So the way these tools were deployed were not by universities buying access to ChatGPT and making it available to their students, for example, but OpenAI basically making the tool available to anybody. And even if an instructor would say, I'm not using ChatGPT in the classroom, they can't prevent the students from going to, I think by now it's paid only, maybe ChatGPT, or there's some limited number of queries you can still do for free, in which case, again, that students just have access to this for free. It's like they could sign on to social media platforms for free. They can use chatbots for free. And it's not just ChatGPT, there are many of them. So even if, if you try to sort of focus too much on one particular product, they'll find another one. That's part of the challenge here. It's free and it's widely available.
Yeah, and I would listen to that. I heard that question a little differently in the sense that, yes, you're right. It's not a tool that the universities have made available. But if the universities they're not having any policy around it, that's problematic. Again, it's my opinion. The universities can choose, but if you don't want students to use it, make it policy. Like, you don't need to wait for regulations from the government. You can just say, hey, this is something that, we want you to learn, and frame it not like a punitive thing, just saying, if you use it as a tool, either be transparent about where you used it and say, I used it for this, and this is where I've used it. Or, otherwise you're not going to learn. You're just going to learn how to use a very free tool that eventually you'll have to pay for. So I think, there's a way to use this as a teaching moment and a collaborative moment. You literally will teach them how to, and then figure out, say, hey, if I figure out you're using it, if I spend resources in figuring it out, I would really say that there are those opportunities exist today. And to the student's point, if they're not hearing that kind of clarity from the university, I think there's an opportunity that you have at your university, your corporation, your organization to make a policy.
I want to second that, but I also want to acknowledge the difficulty of, we've been struggling for years now with media literacy, and there are all these calls for media literacy, and we still don't know exactly how to do it well. And now we have a whole other layer of sort of technology literacy that is required of us. And so we're way behind in terms of developing the kind of resources that would allow, especially faculty who are not in any way in the technical fields, to explain this enough to their students, and then explain, the fact that you might be turning in something that not only is, against our academic integrity policy, but may also be just full of inaccurate information. You don't have enough background knowledge to determine that, but you might turn in just something far worse than you would have written on your own. These are the kind of things that I think a lot of students don't understand right now, right? And I suspect that a lot of faculty don't. So I think we do need those policies quickly, but I think those policies, again, need to be informed by all of the technical faculty on campuses and the folks who have been working on the education side. And how do you actually pedagogically get this kind of information across to people who need it pretty quickly?
Our next question comes from Mackenzie. I want to have better understanding of Bobby's claim that students are having a hard time understanding if there is a line to cross. She mentioned that many students do not intend to cheat, but that the use of technology can cause them to cross that line. In what situation do you think someone will utilize the technology with no intention to cheat and then experience cheating?
I
Go ahead,
think
Bob.
that as students, we all understand that there is a line somewhere, but there are gray areas, and there always will be gray areas. There's technology even that we've had for ages, things like online resources where we are able to use those to study, but then we understand that it would be inappropriate to use that same resource on any kind of exam because those aren't our own notes, even though those are notes we can use to study. That's a gray area that we now have with AI, where we have people who are using it to create outlines, and then they fill in the outline themselves. And the only thing that the AI created was that bare structure. is that cheating, or is that using a resource to speed up a process? And different professors, different instructors will have different opinions on that. And that's where some of the confusion, I think, for students comes in, is that we obviously want to make things easier for ourselves, but there's space for things to be done incorrectly. And we're kind of test subjects in a big experiment. We're figuring out the boundaries as we go.
Again, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it is, yeah, it's a new tool. You're using it, you're going to need to figure it out. And if there's a transparency in communication, that's like trust both ways, saying, I used it for this, that would be one simple way to kind of approach that. And the other one would be like, just say, no, just don't use it, because I really want you to learn how to create outline. This class is about creating outline. So, like that you're crossing the line. This class is not about creating outline. I really don't care how you do it. I remember I wrote a paper a while ago. I'm outing myself. And I used Wiki as my resource. And my teacher was like, she's like, Wiki is not a valid resource for citation. So then what I learned, because we all know how to do shortcuts, is I looked at the sources that the Wiki was using. And then I went to those sources. And I still was doing a shortcut on research, but then now I validated some of the sources to see if that was there or I could find it. So I think it's really great to start with some sort of rules, a set of rules, and say, let's communicate and find out. And whatever you find out, if you document it, you might actually help the next class figure it out. And so as long as there's that open communication, that's literally how you're going to figure it out. If you're trying to go behind each other and hope no one will be caught, or I don't know what she's saying or he's saying, then you create more of a gap with the trust. So I think that's not only a good practice at school, and I don't think you need to understand technology to do that, but that's just good skill to have at work, just good integrity to build for yourself, and good communication skills to build for yourself. And if someone's confused, that's an opportunity. So this is a safer place to learn, as opposed to, a workplace when you do that and you end up encroaching on someone's IP or something like that. I'm not oversimplifying it, but I also think we shouldn't overcomplicate it. So yes, it's tricky, but I would say partner with your teachers and students. And I think the professors can and need to make a statement if they have an opinion about it, or say, I don't really care. Get your grade. I don't care. So you have to have a position on it, I think, whatever that position is, and collaborate with your students.
So I just want to point out the irony that we're talking about accurate disclosure and not misleading people, and how important this is, when sometimes the technology is designed without accurate disclosure and designed in such a way that it misleads people into thinking that they're dealing with people. So we're asking the students to do better than the technologist. And sometimes, by the way, ironically, with good intentions. So I don't know if you guys remember this particular case study, but some Google researchers came up with something called Duplex, which was supposed to be a chatbot that would interact with you, but would have the sort of human sounding ums and ahs and things that would make you think you were talking to a human. And they thought that you would feel better about talking to a chatbot that way, right? And people just lost it, because no, in fact, none of us want to be misled and deceived as to who or what we're talking to, right? And I think, again, that maybe if we can implant those lessons early into all the students, including the ones who are going to build the technology, then we won't have to respond so sharply to some of these tools when they are trying to sort of, make us feel better about interacting with machines. We're perfectly willing to interact with machines when we know what they are and what they do, right? And I think
so, Irina, it's a really interesting point when Duplex came in, because it was part of the I/O, Google I/O, and there was revealed with this big hoo-ha, and then everyone's like, this is so creepy, what are you doing? Which has been the question, as I mentioned before, we raised about the Turing test, because literally a good AI is one that dupes people into thinking that it's good AI. And so we've been raising this question in both robot designs, and robot designs started taking human form. It's not actually easy to do, because robots were being harmed, like people were kicking it, or it's a huge investment, hardware, and they realized that if it looked like humans, people may not harm it. So there's all these reasons why some of this research went in that direction. I do think it's problematic, and there's research out there about why it confuses people when you give camera like eyes, you place it like it's eyes. But I tell you, I was talking to third graders just recently in elementary school about how to design robots, and they knew that those were sensors. They knew that robots can't think. They knew that robots don't care. So somewhere between elementary school, where things are more obvious, to going to build this, we confuse ourselves because the rubric of good design, and we all bias to success, right? We want to do well as students, as engineers. The rubric of design is broken, which is, it's a really, really fundamental thing nobody wants to touch, especially insiders, because they're gaining so much from it. And there's more to be gained by continuing it the way it is, to replicate people, to look like people. There's more benefits to be gained short term than course correcting. And so it's a really tough, like when you go there, you become really unpopular in technical forums. I definitely don't make friends and win influences that way. But it's a really important thing. And Sam and other people who are doing engineering here, I really, really ask you to take this provocation to your place and maybe hold challenges, which is one of the things we're thinking of doing with RI Labs. If you all want to partner, is how do we design AI? How do we design robots that don't mimic people and still are engineering marvel?
Thank you, Alka and Arena. So at this point in time, I do want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our keynote speakers. And for our closing remarks, I want to bring to the camera the interim dean of the College of Business, my friend, Dr. Mary Lou Shockley.
Again, great discussion this afternoon. I am just thrilled about the work that was put into the discussion, as well as the questions that have come through. You've given us most certainly the latest in terms of the language changes that are taking place, hallucination that's going on, the notions that I think of provocation that was talked about by Alka. I think that was just great. So, and industrial polluters, I think regulation that Irena was talking about is maybe being a model to look at regulation for this area as misinformation can come to scale. I think these are all very, very important questions. And I know in the chat, there was a question, I think, by someone that talked about fear. Technology is with us. It is always going to be with us. There's going to be a lot of hype around technology. It's the latest and greatest for right now, but there's more coming. And I think we need to move beyond fear toward understanding. And that's what this was all about today. And I'd like to leave you on that note. So thank you so much to the organizers of today's event, all of my colleagues that were organizers, as well as to our wonderful panelists, Linda, Sam, and Bobby, and of course, our two wonderful guest speakers of Irena and Alka. So thank you all so very, very much for joining us today. I'm going to turn it back now to Jeff Roshman. Thank you and good evening.
Everyone, to our vast viewing audience, I wish all of you a wonderful and peaceful evening. Thank you, good night, and we'll see you next year. Bye-bye now.